Shall I go first, Matt?
Age before beauty.
Of course, every time. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name's David England. I am a health and safety consultant. I've worked in safety for about 25 years. I'm also an author. There are a few of my books out there. And one of the things that we'll be talking about, Matt and I, today are some of the things that have cropped up in the third book that's just been released, which is called Where Next for Health and Safety. Doesn't even know the name of his own book. Look, Matt, over to you.
Thanks, David. So I'm Matt Pal-Howard. I'm head of product development at NEBOSH. Been in the health and safety game racket for nearly 25 years now. Yeah, it's been a great career for me. And I've been at NEBOSH for a large proportion of that time in different roles. And I work extensively with David and other subject matter experts in developing our qualifications. That's me.
Yes, you dragged me in a few years ago, didn't you, Matt? And I've
You
never looked back. I haven't been able to.
wish you never took. Yeah, I mean, it's really, let me smoke you away, David. We rely on people like you, people who are actually out there doing the job to sense check our thinking, my thinking, my team's thinking, how we develop assessments, making sure that we're meeting the needs of our learners. And and it's assessment for learning. That's something people have heard. When we write assessments, that certainly in the advent of the open book examinations, when we moved from that classroom environment, not entirely but largely, learners using so learners, students, whatever you want to call them, refer to them as learners using that assessment time to help inform, help build their understanding, their knowledge, leading obviously to competency, which we're going to talk about today, is an essential part of that learning cycle. So yeah,
that's an interesting point, Matt. Talking about using the SMEs for developing the open book exams, which is something that I'm involved in, as you know. Because one of the things that we discovered in researching for the last book I did was that most people in certainly in health and safety, not so much in risk management, but in health and safety, they seem to have ended up in the profession. It's not something that many people seem to take from college onwards. And it was interesting because it's sort of about the experience that you can bring with you, and that's something that, as I say, I'm hopeful in using in developing the open book exam papers. So I apologise to anyone who's taking their NEBOSH diploma in the next couple of years, because I'm writing your questions. Although we had a very good response to the last one. I understand that the September paper was received very well, so that's good. But that whole sort of experiential route, do you see that as being a positive thing for this sort of NVQ style moving forward, Matt?
I think, respectfully, it's changing a little bit, David, as well. I mean, not many of us, when we were young, always wanted to grow up to be health and safety risk professionals.
I wanted to be a train driver.
Yes, yeah. You'd probably be considered to be quite odd, if you did want to grow up to be a health and safety professional. But with the advent of apprenticeships and you can do an apprenticeship now, of course, at any stage of your life. But there are increasingly, certainly when we do events where you've got 18, 19-year-olds now, 20-year-olds who are coming up and saying, I'm on a health and safety apprenticeship, and this is the career for me, and I want to excel in this area. And I think they're seeing the really great career that you can have ahead of you in terms of challenge, in terms of people, in terms of financial rewards. Let's be very honest, there's some great opportunities out there. I suspect longer term, the real direction will be more towards risk and risk management kind of functions, but maybe we'll pick that up in a moment. But certainly, I'm better at my job for the previous experiences that I had. So I came from, when I finished A levels, was pretty rudderless, started laboring for an engineering company actually, then became a process operator in a top tier coma site, then became a shop steward. And actually that shop steward training was the way I first got turned on to health and safety, then onto a degree, then onto, et cetera, et cetera. So when I draw back often on those experiences that I had previously, I think there are plenty of people out there who'll keep you honest anyway and help you, guide you, and inform you. And it's one of the challenges we have in NEBOSH. Actually, I was having this conversation with one of my colleagues, you know him very well, David Tolson, yesterday around the advent of AI and about the regulators, and we need to respond to what the regulators require of us, Ofqual, SQA, etc. And they say things like, all work must be your own. Well, not very many things are unique. Nearly everything that I do is better for other people having input to it, which is why I use experts like yourself, David, other people within the profession as well to help keep me honest. And the old adage about job as imagined versus job as done. Yeah. So involving people, talking to people, leaning on their experience is just as important as your own experiences. But even now, I mean, I'm not in the first flush of youth. I think I'm 50 in a few weeks. And I still have coaches and people who I talk to. And I put you in that bracket, David, where if I'm stuck on something, I'll still ask, I'll still involve people, but everything I do is informed by those previous experiences. That's not to say, in my opinion, that you can't take a young apprentice if they're surrounded by the right kind of people and they're asked the right sort of questions, that they can't make incredible gains very, very quickly as well. I don't know if I got there in the end, but I think my experience is very, very incredible, important. But you can also, if you've got the right people around you, you can also get to a good standard very quickly as well, I think.
I think that's a really valuable point that you make there, though, Matt, because I always say to people that probably 70-80% of my job is psychology. Right. I'm trying to make people do things that they possibly don't want to do. I'm talking to company owners and directors who don't want to spend money unnecessarily as far as they see it. And health and safety tends to be one of those subjects with some of the clients I've had to work with, where they just deposit money at it, they throw money at it in the hope that it goes away. Just make it happen. Get it out of my sight so I can concentrate on the exciting things: finances, research, developing new products, opening up in new marketplaces. That's exciting. Health and safety doesn't tend to be an exciting occupation. For me, I think it's the most exciting thing there is, because it covers absolutely everything. I work with doctors of chemistry, physicists, chartered engineers, structural engineers. I do get involved. I'm very lucky that I get involved in some really, really exciting things. We're doing some work at the moment on a naval dockyard, testing the infrastructure there. And it's a new method of testing, non-destructive testing. And it's exciting stuff. I'm working with very, very clever people. Now, you don't tend to see that in the early days of health and safety, but you can certainly end up in it. And I think part of the whole competency thing is that dealing with people, dealing with the people on the shop floor who should be wearing gloves or safety boots or whatever it is. They find their gloves uncomfortable. It's finding solutions to those things, isn't it? And how to find those solutions rather than just enforcing it, which is perhaps sometimes the way that we tend to look at health and safety as just an enforcer.
Yeah, which is the least enjoyable part of the role, actually.
Absolutely, yeah.
Measures do need to be taken. And that's the bit I used to enjoy least. I think it might be the case for most people. I used to work in construction. I started off in consultancies. And as you've said, David, the consultancy I was going around, it was trying to convince farmers to put a fragile roof sign up on top of an asbestos, cement barn. And if you manage them to get them to
Yeah.
spend 35 quid on that, it was a win. I wasn't in the
Yeah.
sort of the cool and sexy environment you're operating in, that very, very high hazard, because I wasn't, frankly, competent to work in those kind of environments either.
But again, it's all part of the experience route, isn't it? If you can deal with like I say, people who don't really want to hear what you've got to say, because you're either telling them to spend money they don't think they should spend, or do something that they don't think they need to do. We hear all the time, health and safety is just common sense. My answer to that is always, you show me where the common sense is, and I'll walk away and leave you alone.
Yeah.
Until such time, I'll stay here and keep watching. Do you think then that there's you talked about apprenticeships, you touched on apprentices there. Do you think apprenticeship is perhaps a way forward with health and safety? You can learn so much, can't you, from people that have done the job?
What I would say, David, is I'm just being very honest here. When I did my degree, I was about mid-20s, 24, 25, I think, when I started my degree in safety and environmental management at the University of Hull. And it was 4 great years, actually. I really, really enjoyed it. I worked with some great people. Steve Pace, who runs the program there, excellent guy. But when I finished my degree, if you allow me, when I graduated, the vice chancellor told this story, and he said a young guy, a graduate, gets his first job, his first job working in a engineering company. On his first day, they get sent down to the stores, and they get introduced to the storeman. And the storeman says, "Right, what I need you to do is sweep up." And the apprentice says, the graduate says, "You can't just tell me to sweep up. I'm a graduate." And the storeman says, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry. This is how you use a brush." And it was literally, just because you've got your degree doesn't mean to say you know anything, frankly. Yeah. So I was well qualified. Theoretically, I was pretty good. I knew my onions. It was 4 hard years, working full time, family, all the rest of it. What a hero. You don't need to say it. What a hero. But actually, I didn't really know the role of a practitioner.
Yeah.
So I think if you're an apprentice and you're surrounding yourself by people who have, a chest full of medals, and they've had some really good experiences, and you can learn from them, that for me would have been something that I would have really welcomed. So it's great, the fact that, there are some of our institutions that are now offering mentoring services. I think it's something that the Institute, the RSM, have offered for a while, or they certainly I think they still do. Surrounding yourself by practitioners who are prepared to give yourself some time is a huge win. But I think I also mentioned to you, David, it wasn't that long ago. I mean, I remember previous chief exec of NEBOSH, Teresa Bloodworth, telling me once.
I remember Teresa.
Remember Teresa? Yeah. It wasn't all that many years ago when there was an advert in the back of what was then Safety and Health Practitioner, which is a magazine we always take, where there was an advert for car park attendant and safety officer. So we've actually come a long way in a very, very short space of time, where there's now people like you, David. I'm sure you're, the projects you're working on, multi-million-pound projects. These are senior people. There was a great guy, Tom Wyke, who works for the FA. I was speaking to him not long ago, and I said, "So what's your plans for the future?" And he said, "Well, I want to be a chief exec." There's absolutely no reason now why safety practitioners, because they are having those senior, high-level conversations. They understand business. They understand risk of getting those opportunities to go on and on and on. But at the beginning of your career, if you can surround yourself by people who really do know their onions, that might be a bit of a UK-centric phrase, apologies, but who know their stuff, that has to be a win, right? And I know you once asked me earlier around MVQs. At NEBOSH, we don't offer MVQs at the moment. But I'm a big fan of them. I think they're a really good thing. But
the open book is quite close, isn't it? It's quite close in so much as the scenarios that we develop. They're very in depth. you have to take quite a lot of information from them. It's almost like certainly when I write them, I try to make them as realistic as possible. I never put any real names in them, obviously, because I'm terrified of slander. But they are quite realistic. I mean, I've got a friend of mine who's currently going through an NVQ level 6 in health and safety, and it's all centered around what he does in his work.
Yeah.
Now, thankfully, he works for quite a big company. It's a 110 million pound turnover. He's got lots of stuff going on that he can write about. But I do think, if you worked for a much smaller organization, you'd probably have to invent quite a bit. So I think that blend of knowing the regulations, because that's really important from my perspective, is knowing what does the law actually require from you, and being able to blend that.
Sorry, Dave, forgive me. It'd be a miss of me to I don't know enough about how NVQ, we all hear horror stories. I'm sure people hear stories about NEBOSH qualifications, about City and Guilds qualifications. There's an awful lot of stuff out. But certainly when it comes to NVQs, I've never assessed an NVQ. We do a health and safety diploma for all new inspectors who work for the health and safety executive and for the Office of Rail and Road. We have 2 different qualifications for them. And around 250 credits, so 2,500 hours of their training is based putting together a portfolio, which are all observed. So it's a pseudo NVQ. So they have to be observed issuing a legally enforceable notice. They have to be observed establishing some form of rapport with a duty holder. They have to, and it's observed by their line manager, and then that's then externally verified, and then internal verification. And it's a really robust process. And the quality of the inspectors coming out the other side. Well, somebody who's received a visit from one of these inspectors and been hit with a huge FIFA intervention bill might differ, but the quality of the inspector coming out the other side is absolute stellar by taking that approach. But coupled with that, observed portfolio type approach, they also have to do 9 other forms of assessment. So they have to do assignment-based reports on occupational health interventions, on engineering, safety tech intervention, and then they have to do some very knowledge test, very, very clear knowledge test to prove that they've got the theoretical and the practical understanding. And that's how you get that really rounded inspector coming out the other end.
Absolutely. Kind of tying in with what you were saying about the graduate sweeping up. I remember when I passed my driving test at the tender age of 17, which is very nearly 40 years ago now, Matt. You wouldn't believe it, would you? You wouldn't think I'm a day over 56, would you, to be honest? I remember a member of my family saying to me the day I passed my test, okay, so you've passed your test, now you've got to learn how to drive. And of course, at 17, you know everything anyway, don't you? Of
course you do.
I don't know why you bother going to college, because clearly, all knowledge is yours. But I found that a really interesting, and I've kind of used that throughout my life. I mean, when I did the NEBOSH diploma many years ago, I then took everything that I'd learned and destruct tested it, and that's kind of how I ended up writing the books and so forth, because I question everything. I think it's important, like you were saying, with people like Bird's Triangle and Heinrich and Haddon and all these people. We learn this kind of stuff, but is it valuable? Do we pick it apart and make sure that it's, or do you take out the right pieces from it? You've learned it, now digest it, if you like.
And that's what you've tried to do on your book as well, isn't it? You really try to test that thinking, not only where we're going, but also you've been told this, question it. And actually that's a really important competency. You mentioned about driving. My middle daughter passed the test 2 weeks ago.
Congratulations.
Well, I'm petrified, frankly. Um, because somebody said to me once, well, they're competent enough. And you go, well, can you be partially competent? If you're only partially competent, you're incompetent, right? And when you do pass your test, actually, she's very good. She's safe. The kids these days, they've all got black boxes in the cars. They all, you know, frankly, my son spends more time looking at his speedo than he does eyes on the road because they're so petrified of going. So actually, they're very often very safe drivers. Maybe don't have the road awareness, they maybe don't have those. But that's another really good example when we talk about competency, about it being about qualification, about experience, about you know, about ongoing behaviors. Because I know the way she's driving now is not the way she's going to be driving in 5 years. You know, she'll be full of bad habits. She'll have her elbow on the side of the door. She'll be, you know,
absolutely,
you know, all those things. And it was really interesting when HSE, probably about 10 years ago now, changed their stance on, do you remember, changed their stance on what competency actually is? And I should just trip off my tongue how we would assess competency. You should know this, Dave. Well, probably do it.
Well, it stemmed out of the Lofsted report, didn't it? Because the competency was all killed out of the first aid regulations. They changed HSG 65. We lost the POPI-MAR routine, which actually made huge amounts of sense to everybody. I even have engineering friends and colleagues who loved POPI-MAR because engineers are very literal. They like things to be boxed and formatted and bullet pointed. That's how their minds work. And to fall into the plan, do, check, act routine is just, what does that mean? You know, that takes too much theory for them.
Yeah. Dude, at the risk of sounding like two old farts, you did used to be able to give the old HSG 65 to somebody, new practitioner, go, that's your job.
Absolutely.
You know, yeah. But things changed, don't they? I don't know quite where we're going with this, but it's an interesting debate if you can be competent enough. Because that's incompetent. But certainly those ongoing behaviors. That's where we were going with this, wasn't it? Let's get back on track. The ongoing behaviors bit. So you'll send somebody, and we'll get a moment about how you check that training has actually been effective and worked. But we're not very good at that, I don't think. When we send somebody on training, we observe them, we sign them off. You know, from the process industry, you're observed. Yeah, you can do that. You can do that. You know, filter change. You can do that. Whatever. It's not very often, if at all. Some people, they'll come back and they'll still make sure that you are doing all the isolations, you're wearing all the PPE, you're doing all the checks, all the balances, you're following that standard operating procedure. That standard operating procedure works, is correct. It's almost like that's done, move on. Whereas, you know, when you're not being observed, you know, the job done at 3 o'clock in the morning is not the way it's done at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You know, we know this, don't we?
No,
so
exactly right.
Ongoing behaviors is such an important part of competency, and I think we need to all be a little bit better at checking for that, actually.
And I think that ties in what you've just said, Matt. That ties in really well with what we were talking about earlier in terms of understanding people.
Yeah,
you know, you're working with people. I've seen you know, health and safety people on site at big industrial sites where they'll waltz in, blow the whistle, stop the job. This isn't safe. How do we make it safe? Well, you need to come up with something, and they'll walk away. And you know that the entire shop floor is watching from behind a pillar until they've walked out of the door, and then they just carry on. That's the kind of situation that you know is going to happen. And that's the kind of culture that you need to change. It's the kind of behavior that you need to change. And that doesn't change by just knowing all the regulations. It doesn't change by just passing examinations. That's real world stuff.
Yeah.
And I think some of the issue comes also from the boardroom, from the company owners. We've now been lumbered, you know, with fire and quality and environmental and well-being and mental health and first aid and all the rest of it. I'm not quite sure how long the title would be for a job like that.
So question for you then, Dave, with that sort of diversification of safety, health, and I always hate leaving the health bit off because the health is the bit that I really enjoy. You know, we used to be health and safety.
Mhm.
We're now health, safety, risk.
Mhm.
We're now health, safety, risk, fire, quality, environmental. All that diversification, do you think that's making people less competent at their sort of core role or better, understanding how it all interrelates?
I think from a personal viewpoint and kind of touching on the apprenticeship thing, I think it exposes people perhaps to areas that they may not have been involved in previously. And they might find something that they really enjoy. As I say, I deal with doctors of chemistry. I've got a colleague who's he knows everything about DESIR, about dangerous substances and explosive atmospheres. He is my man for DESIR. He knows nothing else. He will just talk to you about DESIR endlessly.
Sat next to him at a party.
He really is not the most exciting man, but I love him to bits because if I have a DESIR problem, I know I can wheel him in. And there is nothing that he can't fix. Now, he stumbled across that. He's an electrician by trade. He stumbled across DESIR. He's now one of only about 100 people in the country who is qualified to his level in working on electrics in explosive atmospheres. So very, very qualified person. So exposure to all of those things, you suddenly might discover that fire really is your thing, or quality really is your thing. For me, and this is something I discussed in the book, was that health and safety is possibly the wrong term for us now.
Okay.
I think it's just safety, because even health, let's take exposure to asbestos. That's risking your safety. It might be risking it in 40 years' time, but it's still a risk to your safety. And health has always been the poor relation, hasn't it, in the equation?
Accident and all that.
Yeah, even the HSE, sort of recognize that health really isn't what we focus on. But I think everything is about safety. One of the issues, of course, is that safety is generally controlled by gravity, and gravity affects everybody. It affects you and I exactly the same. It doesn't matter what your background is, what your educational regime is. It doesn't matter what your skin color is. It does not matter. Gravity will affect you the same way. But health can be affected by, we saw in the pandemic, there were pockets of communities that were affected far more severely than others. And no one has an answer for that. Medicine doesn't have an answer for that. So health affects people differently, and that's quite hard to cope with. To round back on your question, Matt, I think personally, I think where this comes from is again from board level. We've got a health and safety guy. What else can we do with him? He just goes around with a clipboard ticking stuff. What else can we? Let's give him fire. Let's give him quality. And what I think is that kind of lessens the importance of safety as a function. And I think that's a conversation we really need to have. I was thinking about this the other day with barristers. Barristers are incredibly clever people, very highly trained. They know the law inside out, but they only know the law. And I've worked with barristers where you're about to go into court. You have an hour with them before you go into court, and you have to explain your situation and the company's function to them in an hour. And within an hour, they've got it. They understand it. Now, we don't deride barristers. We don't look down on barristers. But I feel that we do sometimes look down on health and safety people. And actually, health and safety people are very similar. They know a vast amount, a small amount about a vast range of subjects. And I always say to people, that I mentor, it's not about knowing the answer. It's about knowing you've got a problem. So long as you know you've got a problem, you can find someone to fix it. Like you've said, you come across problems and you rely on SMEs like me and all the other people that work for NEBOSH in trying to resolve them. And I think that's the conversation we need to have. We need to make safety far more relevant and important in the whole corporate scheme of things, rather than just this bolt-on. I mean, heaven forfend, we've got solicitors and practitioners in HR selling health and safety services. But that's not right. We're the people that know what we're talking about, and I think there's a huge amount of value that we can give corporately, but that's a bigger conversation to have.
You mentioned there around. You've heard me say this before, I'm sure, Dave. You've heard most of my stories now. But a good pal of mine, Barry Wilkes.
Barry, yes, bless him.
Barry, back at HC now, and Barry,
Yeah.
When he was young inspector, he'd only been in the role a couple of weeks, and he was sent out onto the job, and his senior manager, whoever was looking after him at the time, as this young recruit, said, if you find something dodgy, if you look at it long enough, somebody will come over and tell you what's wrong with it. And that's as good advice as you give anybody starting out in health and safety, I think. But you've mentioned a few times that you use your DESIA specialists, you bring in other engineering specialists, you work a lot with Andy, who's an engineer, as you know.
Yeah.
So you as a seasoned professional consultant working on high hazard, high risk sites, or with hypo sites, you've got no qualms of bringing in specialists to support you, though, have you? When they think outside of your see.
No. And again, I think it's knowing about where to look rather than just what to look for. And again, this brings us back to the whole regulatory thing. This was something, again, that came out of the book, and it comes out about the whole experiential thing that a lot of health and safety people end up in health and safety. It isn't about complying with the law. It's not simply about complying with the law. Half of my job is keeping my clients out of court. I'm trying to make sure that they don't end up in a courtroom. That's engaging with directors and business people. But the true point of what I do for a living, what I wake up for every morning, is to make sure that people at work go home the same shape as they turned up in the morning. That's what I do this for. I've done some crazy stuff. I've seen some horrendous things going on in workplaces and thought, that's just not right. It's just not right. And 20 years ago, I wouldn't have known what the answer was, and that's probably what drove me to end up. I mean, when I was first introduced to NEBOSH, I thought it was some sort of medical device, a sort of hammer that doctors use to beat you about with.
You're very polite there, David. You could have
I'm trying to be. But going through the diploma, there's all this stuff, all this psychology, and there's stuff about environment, and there's stuff about chemistry and mechanical devices. And again, that exposure produces all sorts of directions that you can go down that perhaps you hadn't known about. It's like joining the police, isn't it? You always start as a beat bobby, but you could end up in the dog squad or the mounted police or the river squad, or there are all these different disciplines within the police force, but until you join it, you don't know that they're there. And I think that's a lot of the thing with what we do. I think also it's about assessing risk for severity and consequence. That's not something I see very often in my day-to-day role. We tend, and I did a presentation at where was it? Farnborough, just recently, the Farnborough show. I was invited to go and do that. 5 days after I landed back from a month in Australia, I hasten to add. So I had plenty of time to put that together.
I was receiving emails from you when you were on a holiday.
There's no such thing as a holiday, no such thing. But it was one of the things I touched on was that, and it caused a little bit of disturbance, was that we spend too much time risk assessing for the sake of risk assessing, and this is what I'm talking about. Complying with the law.
I've got a good example for you, David. I've got a RAMS when I finish here today, literally this afternoon.
Yeah.
My colleagues is off to an event to take photographs, and they've asked for a RAMS for taking photographs. And I've said, surely we've said no That's ridiculous.
I hope so.
We did, but guess what?
They
Computers.
rejected you.
I've got to go write a RAMS for taking photographs. Unbelievable.
And that I think is where the whole competency things comes in. And I see this, you know, from you've alluded to the fact I work on some fairly big sites. I work with I'm working with a local window cleaner. He employs 5 people. He's just employed his 5th person, and he came to me and he said, now I'm working for him for peanuts because I want to make him better. He wants to be better, and I want to make him better. I want his people to be safe. But I've said to him, I'm not writing you risk assessments just, you know, to end up as shelfware. That's not what this is about. What I'm doing is let's look at how you work. And if I can find a better way, a safer way, then let's try that. But I'm not just writing you documents to comply with the law, because that's not keeping people safe. And one of the things that I pointed out in the presentation was that the Health and Safety at Work Act, which is, you know, our Bible, if you like, doesn't mention the word risk assessment, the phrase risk assessment once, not even in the guidance, the original guidance, which David Towson put me onto, funnily enough. I didn't even know it existed, but he found a copy of it.
Wow.
So I've read that, and it doesn't talk about risk assessment. What it talks about is the provision of safety.
Yes.
And that's the key. That's the key. Writing a risk assessment is not going to make you safe.
It's an implied duty, isn't it? Because how do you know? How do you know unless you've looked for it? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. You touched on the HSE diploma. How do you think that the HSE is encouraging and developing the competency within their own inspectorate, Matt, beyond that? Is that
do you know, in fairness to them, I'm fortunate within NEBOSH. We travel.
Yeah. I've seen you all over the place.
Yeah, very fortunate actually. It's, you know, you mentioned earlier about you never know where your career is going to go, and actually I've been fortunate to go to places I never thought I'd see, work with people I never thought I'd get the opportunity to. It's been great, challenging, but fabulous at the same time.
Yeah.
Our regulator, HC and ORR, took a very, very similar view, are, if not the best in the world, they are the very, very top in terms of the skills, the quality, the back room controls, the enforcement management model, all that sort of stuff that sits over there as well. So the way they approach inspection and the way they train, and I put my cards on the table. I am a fanboy of HSE. I work extensively with the guys at the lab, who are a great bunch at Science Division, but also the chaps in Bootle and ORR down in Canary Wharf. They really want the best inspectorate they possibly can. They're very selective on who they pick. They've, you know, it's a 2-year training program. It's a postgraduate level diploma they go through. But the vast majority of that time is spent boots on the ground, going into workplaces and talking. I mean, they have this sort of invisible flick knife in the back of their pockets. We all know about that. But the approach they're now taking into regulation is changing as well, where, you know, in times gone by, they'd want to see evidence of the risk assessments. They'd want to see evidence. Now, if they walk into a workplace that is well controlled and well managed, they'll accept that. On face value, they'll talk to the right people. They'll do that. Of course, they're looking for material breaches. But they are selective who they pick. They're selective as to the model they use for training, and the challenge is right. So one of the things that's really important when it comes to competency, and something that my team focus on, and I think something that we're all guilty of in other walks of life, is that when you develop training and you put training in place, you just assume that it's meeting your requirements to help competency argument. And that's not the case. You know, if I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, David, I think it was in this conversation, or maybe I
think it was this one. Could have been one earlier.
Around absolutely everything that I do is better for other people looking at it.
Mm.
And being involved in the same applies to my team. Of course, there comes a time when you have to go, enough consultation, that's fit for purpose, away we go. You know, of course, there comes that stage. But if people listening to this call or listen to the recording are developing training themselves, and there's a good chance they will be, and they just sat there and they just go, oh, fine, we'll deliver that. That's not sound. You know, it might be for very, very simple things, you know, for an induction or whatever. But how do you know that that message and that learning and that transfer of knowledge has actually been effective? We've all sat, you know, let's face it, David, health and safety can be the most boring subject in the world. It can be.
Yeah.
Not
for us, obviously.
Not for us. You know, and that's one of the things I would say actually to young practitioners or even older people who are deciding that they want to get into health and safety. If they don't feel as passionately as you certainly do, and I 100%, I mean, we're not being flippant here either. The thought that somebody being hurt because of their work pulls us, David, doesn't it?
It does.
Viscerally.
Yeah.
And if you haven't got that, you will find some parts of the role challenging.
Yeah.
Because, you know, you need that in your locker to really be, that's ultimately what you're doing this for. You know, you want to do that change, and it's a noble way to earn a living. You know, it's important. So checking that your training has been effective, that the passage of information has been received. Very often when we do training and we get the happy sheets, actually what we're looking at there is the tutor. Actually, we're looking at the learner.
Yeah.
Not what did you think of this tutor?
Very good.
Yeah, you know, you don't want to be bored out your head. What did you as a learner get from that training?
Yeah.
Did you understand the learning outcomes? Was there the correct level of challenge? And then you can then build on that. And there's a really nice model, Kirkpatrick model, where you can then go, okay, so training was useful. Have you applied it? Has your behavior changed? Is the business now getting a return on investment? Is it reflective of the KPIs? No, So you kind of follow it all the way through. And that's what we try to do when we develop a qualification. We launch something, we very often pilot. And I would encourage everybody on here, you can usually get most things out in a pilot. You know, as soon as you say pilot, people just relax a bit.
That's right.
Something a little bit different. You know, you pilot, you test, but then you go back. Is it worked? Has it worked? Has it worked?
Yeah.
Is it leaning towards that competency development? And if it's not, do it again, change it. And actually the HSE model, tracking back, and the ORR model, we take a very, very similar approach to HSE, is that it's been developed over many, many years. You know, it started off as an MVQ, I think, David. And, you know, first of all, it started off Aston.
Yes, I think it was. Yeah.
Then it went to Warwick, and then we picked it up about 2015. But it's been tested, amended, changed. It's a living, breathing document, actually. It's a bit like our National General Certificate, our diploma. They've changed, they've flexed, they've been redeveloped many times to make sure that they still stay fit for purpose. But they're not just, we mustn't ever think that, you know, we can just quickly write.
Well, that's almost the same as the risk assessment, isn't it? You know, you've written a risk assessment for taking photographs at a venue. But the control measures that you introduce, are they effective? That's the key point, isn't it? It's the same with training. I've written a training package. People sit down, they learn it, they write nice things on the comment box. They say, yes, the biscuits were lovely, and the trainer was wonderful and really passionate. But then you go back to your job and you forget it all. Yeah. That's the key. So that control measure has not worked. And I think that's really important, because training is a control measure that we so often use. You know, I see it in risk assessments all the time. All the people are trained. Excellent. To what standard? To what level? For how long?
Yeah.
You know, I get it that sweeping the floor, you don't have to be trained that much. But, you know, we have people, we have boys and girls working in steel foundries, which is one of the most dangerous jobs there is. And yet we don't have many accidents in steel foundries. All right, there are probably people out there saying, well, the UK doesn't have any steel foundries anymore, but historically they have not been, problematic because the people are really, really competent at what they do. And competency is a control measure within itself. But like you say, we have to make sure that competency has been checked, that it's been verified, and that what people have been trained to do is what they're actually doing.
Yeah.
And if that's not what they're doing, we need to adjust the training module, because people will find better ways of doing things, won't they? You and I obviously have never done any shortcuts in our working career at all, Matt.
Of course, we've been flipping over. Of course we have, which is why we're better at our roles.
Exactly right. Yeah. Yeah.
Because, it's the old adage, isn't it? Poacher turned gamekeeper, but we've all dumb things,
crazy stuff.
But I would say of all the things, all the accidents I've been involved in, not directly, but thankfully I've been in a few silly ones, but all the ones I've investigated, it's always been a case of people trying to make the job work.
Exactly.
Them being, and I'm sure this will resonate with people that were listening.
Yeah.
It's very rare that you find somebody who's being deliberately, choose isn't the right word, but not working.
Not working to the plan. Yeah. They're
just trying to make the job work because the job is designed appropriately for them, but actually they're using some really great skills in coming up with those workarounds. And you mentioned about risk assessment earlier in refineries, in foundries. Actually, not too far from where I'm sat. Scunny's still going strong, David.
Wonderful, and
in steel
may continue to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. That you'll very rarely go somewhere or be exposed to something when it comes to risk assessment that doesn't have some controls in place. A bit like the window cleaner example you used a moment ago. They will have controls in place, David, won't they? It might not be written down, but they will be there, and they'll be. You're not looking at zero. You're going to be building up what's already there. And I think that's the case in most places. And when you start tapping into those people who are working and exposed to those things, they have great ideas, great concepts. They just need sometimes a bit of help in formulating them, putting them into place.
Yeah.
Developing them.
I have to say, Matt, that in all the places that I've worked in, and all the places that I've had the great pleasure to consult in, I've never yet met any company or any boss, be it a manager or a director or whatever, who specifically wants to hurt people.
Oh, correct.
I've never met anyone that goes out of their way to hurt people.
I've worked with some incompetent managers, though, David, who have been appointed into positions because of their technical understanding, as opposed to their ability to lead, manage, motivate, encourage, challenge, if I haven't said that already. I've certainly worked with people like that before. And when you come to competency, that's a different conversation, I think. But recruiting the right people, and sometimes people who may not have as many technical skills, but have all the other package, the technical bit can be developed, right? The other bit, sometimes, frankly, sometimes people will never be leaders as long as their bums point downwards. You can use different words there if you like, but
other metaphors are available.
I think that's a really essential part of as well. David, I'm mindful of time, and one of the questions I asked Mike before we came, I said, "Got anything I should ask David?" Because obviously they work with you just as I do. And one of the questions was, and this is in your role as a consultant, do you think it would be helpful, under CDM or whatever kind of model, that you almost made that health and safety consultant title a protected term, or something that would encourage better competency within clients if they were drawing down on that external advice, or even an internal consultant? People have those as well. Do you think that would bring any actual benefits? Or
I think it would. I
Yeah.
think it would. I think we need to centralize the way that we look at competency in health and safety in much the same way as we do in architecture, in medicine, in law. There are, this is a profession. We are professionals. We do this, one, because we're passionate about it, and two, because we're very good at it. There's no getting around that. Health and safety is a really, really cool profession because it's exposed to it has tentacles in every single department of an organization. You have to understand it and you have to make it work. And making it work will make the organization more productive, more profitable, and safer. These things are inextricably linked. There's no question about that in my mind. So, part of the argument, again, and I don't think I've referred to my book enough just yet, so I'm going to refer to it one more time.
All your other two books.
Oh, my other two. I'm glad you brought that up, man. One of the things that we discussed was this playing down of health and safety. It's become cliched since 74. Let's not forget that before 1974, there was no such thing. It was welfare. It was factory safety. It was, all sorts of things.
Whitewashing factory walls.
Absolutely. And let's not forget that the Factory Acts were, they weren't all that clever. The Abrasive Wheels Act had to come in because the Factories Act said you had to guard the entire grinding wheel, which meant that all grinding wheels were completely useless because they were covered in dust.
Machines must be guarded. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've learned a great deal, and what I love about the Health and Safety at Work Act is that it's so high level. If you have a risk, if you create a risk, you must deal with it, and that takes skill, experience, competency. It takes all the things, training, all the things we've been talking about. A lot of head scratching, a lot of talking to professional people, engineers, all those sorts of people, and coming up with the best solution. So for my mind, and this isn't just because I'm in the game, I think this is really the most important thing that we can do. It is a professional profession. So if we had a protected term, a protected title, I think that would make what we say a lot more important and carry a lot more gravitas than it does perhaps currently.
Well, with that in mind, then, as we are, we're presenting here for RRSM,
Yes.
NEBOSH offer a qualification. I should have mentioned this earlier.
I don't think, you haven't mentioned that just yet.
On risk management alongside RRSM.
Mm.
You're a very proud member of the Institute. Do you think it's about time that health and safety came under the risk management banner? Do you think that would bring any more?
No question, Matt. No question in my mind. Risk management, when you look at people like the IRM, the Institute of Risk Management, they're looking at financial risks and market risks and all that sort of thing. Again, very corporate, very exciting, very dynamic. But one thing that I do like about the RRSM, and it's not just because we're presenting for them, or the fact that I'm a fellow of it, but what I love about the RRSM is that it's about risk management. It isn't just about health and safety, and I think that's a really important distinction. Health and safety, or just safety, or welfare is about taking a risk, however you're going to, endanger someone at work, whether it's through a stress or a mechanical risk or a chemical risk or a risk to their health over a period of 40 years. That risk has to be managed, and it takes experience and skill and qualification in order to manage that risk. So I think I couldn't agree more that what we do is risk management, and we need to look at it.
I'm mindful that Lauren's just rejoined.
Lauren has just appeared again. She's watching us intently. Look,
just to top and tail that, Dave, one of the questions that we get asked all the time at NEBOSH, certainly when we're developing our safety diplomas, is that, and it relates back to competency, is that very often safety practitioners don't necessarily understand the language of business, and risk obviously falls under that. So it's it's an area of constant thought and mulling over when it comes to us developing.